The thing about Buckingham Palace is that nobody ever expects anything real to happen there. That's the honest truth. You show up, you take your photos, you watch the guards stand there like they've been carved out of stone, and you leave feeling like you've checked something off a list. It's a tourist attraction. It's a postcard. It feels, and I know this sounds strange, fake, like a theme park version of history. That's what most people think. And that's exactly what Marcus Thiel thought on the morning of the 14th of March. I know because I was standing roughly 8 feet away from him when everything unfolded. And I've replayed those minutes so many times in my head that by now they feel less like a memory and more like a film I've watched too many times. Every frame burned in, every sound preserved. I need to tell you what happened, not the version that circulated on social media within hours, not the clipped 20-second video that went viral across 3 continents. The whole thing, from the beginning. Because the beginning matters, it always does. It was early for a tourist crowd, maybe 9:30 in the morning. London in mid-March is a particular kind of cold that doesn't quite bite but never lets go. That thin, damp chill that seeps under your collar and settles against your neck. The sky was the color of old dishwater. Not raining, but thinking about it, the way London skies always seem to be thinking about it. The Victoria Memorial was already drawing a modest crowd. A school group from somewhere in the Midlands, maybe 30 children in matching yellow high-vis jackets, were arranged in a loose semicircle while their teacher gestured upward at the golden figure of victory atop the memorial. 2 Japanese tourists were working through a very serious photographic documentation of the gates, moving methodically, unhurried. A young couple was eating something from a paper bag. An older gentleman in a green wax jacket was standing with his hands in his pockets, just looking at the palace like he'd looked at it many times before and still found something in it worth seeing. I was there with my cousin. She'd flown over from Toronto specifically because she'd never been to London, and Buckingham Palace was at the top of her list in the way it always is at the top of people's lists when they've never been. I'd agreed to come as the guide, which meant standing there while she photographed things from 12 different angles and periodically asking me questions I didn't know the answers to. Do they actually live in there? Some of them. How many rooms? A lot. Do you think the guards are cold? I looked at the guard nearest to us. He was stationed in his sentry box, that distinctive black-painted wooden box with its crown embellishment, standing with his SA-80 rifle held correctly in front of him, bayonet fixed, his head perfectly still beneath the enormous bearskin hat. The full ceremonial dress, scarlet tunic, white gloves, trousers seemed pressed with what must be surgical precision. He's trained not to feel cold, I said, which isn't accurate but seemed to satisfy her. She went back to her camera, and that's when I noticed Marcus Thiel. He caught my attention before he did anything worth noticing. That's the thing about people who are about to do something stupid. There's often a preliminary frequency to them, something that registers just below conscious thought. He was standing too close to the barrier, not against it in the comfortable tourist way, where you lean on the railing and take your photo, but positioned just past the informal boundary that crowds naturally maintain out of a combination of respect and vague nervousness. He was in his mid-20s, I'd guess. Heavyset, not tall. He had on a dark gray puffer jacket, unzipped, and the kind of tracksuit bottoms that suggest someone has stopped worrying about what impression they're making. His hair was short, and his jaw was working the way jaws do when someone's on something or just vibrating at a frequency that doesn't quite match their surroundings. He wasn't with anyone, no camera, no phone out, he was just looking. And not in the way tourists look, not with wonder or curiosity or even boredom. He was looking with a specific quality of attention, the kind that locks onto a target and starts calculating. I noticed him, I felt it somewhere at the back of my mind. I turned back to my cousin. Can we go closer? She was asking. To the gate, yeah, just not past the... And then somebody near me made a sound. Not a scream. More like a sharp intake of breath, the kind that comes before a scream finds its shape. I turned. Marcus Thiel had moved to the sentry box. Not near it, to it. He had crossed that invisible line, the one that you just don't cross, and was standing close enough that he could have reached out and touched the guard's uniform. The crowd had noticed. There was that immediate atmospheric shift that happens in public spaces when something goes wrong, a collective stillness, the way birds go quiet before a storm. The guard hadn't moved, not 1 millimeter. His eyes were forward, his rifle held in proper position. His face was completely, utterly neutral. And Marcus Thiel reached out and grabbed the barrel. I want to be precise about this because the video doesn't show it clearly, and I've seen it mischaracterized. He didn't touch it lightly or test it. He grabbed it both hands, a proper grip, pulling grip, and yanked. It happened in a fraction of a second. What happened next happened in the next fraction of a second. The guard, whose name I learned later was Guardsman Daniel Foy, 23 years old, from Doncaster, 8 months into his ceremonial posting, did not shout, did not escalate immediately, did not lose composure in any way that I could see. What he did was execute what I later learned is a standard disarmament retention procedure, essentially a set of movements drilled so deeply into muscle memory that they happen not just faster than thought, but instead of thought. The rifle did not move. I want to be clear about this. Despite the force of that grab, the rifle did not move. What moved was Marcus Thiel. His wrists came back to him in a way that wrists are not designed to travel. He made a sound. I won't try to describe the sound because I can't do it justice, and the people who heard it at close range still talk about it in a particular hushed way. But it wasn't a scream, it was more involuntary than that. He stumbled backward, 2 steps, 3. The guard's voice came, and this is the detail that has stayed with me most, the one that I come back to when I think about that morning. It came at a volume that did not seem possible from a man who had just been standing in motionless silence. Stand back from the guard. Not shouted, projected. There's a difference. Shouting is emotional. This was mechanical, precise, enormous, the sound of a voice that has been trained to carry authority at a distance and deliver it with the weight of an institution behind it. The school children, 30 of them in yellow jackets, made a sound like a single startled bird. Marcus Thiel sat down on the ground, not crouched, sat, like his legs had simply decided they were done. The crowd was completely, absolutely silent. 3 Metropolitan Police officers were on scene within what felt like 90 seconds. I don't have a precise time because I wasn't watching my watch. I was watching everything else. But it was fast. The kind of fast that suggests they'd been paying attention to this situation before most of us even noticed Thiel standing too close. He was helped to his feet. I use the word helped loosely, in the way that you help someone when they don't have many options, and walked, or rather steered, away from the gate. The guardsman had returned to his position. I don't mean he'd relaxed. I mean he had returned to exactly the position he'd been in before Marcus Thiel had grabbed his rifle, rifle forward, eyes ahead, bearskin straight, face neutral. Like the event had not penetrated whatever interior space he occupied during his duty. A tourist near me, I think she was American, mid-40s, turned to her husband and said, very quietly, "Did that just happen?" And her husband, who had clearly seen the whole thing and still didn't quite believe it, said, "I don't know." My cousin was standing beside me with her camera hanging from her hand, and her mouth slightly open. "He didn't even flinch," she said. "He didn't even flinch." I looked at the guardsman in his sentry box. He was standing in exactly the position he'd been standing in when we arrived. Still, composed, correct. "No," I said, "he didn't." We stayed another hour, which I know sounds strange given what had just happened, but somehow nobody left. The crowd didn't disperse after the police walked Thiel away. It actually grew, as people who'd been further back pressed forward to understand what they'd half seen. People were talking in that half-whispered, charged way you talk when you've witnessed something that doesn't fit any category you had prepared for it. The older gentleman in the green wax jacket was still there. I saw him watching the guardsman with an expression that I can only describe as deep, steady respect. The kind that isn't performed for anyone, that you can tell is completely genuine. "Happens more than you'd think," he said to no one in particular. "Not usually quite that brazen, but they get tested all the time." Someone asked him if he knew how they stayed so still. "Years," the man said simply. "Years and a particular kind of character. Not everyone can do it. Most people can't." He said it without any drama, just as a statement of fact. I thought about Guardsman Daniel Foy, 23, from Doncaster, standing in that box, weapon grabbed, wrists yanked, crowd watching, and returning to stillness in the same breath. I thought about the gap between what that looks like from the outside, easy, statue-like, almost theatrical, and what it must actually require on the inside. They are not statues. That's the thing. They're young men and women who have chosen, for reasons that are entirely their own, to represent something much older and larger than themselves. And they do it with a precision that most people will never come close to in any area of their own lives. I thought about all of that while my cousin stood next to me, finally taking her photographs again. She got a wonderful one of the guardsmen in his box, mid-morning light catching the gold of his tunic buttons. She's framed it. It's on her wall in Toronto. Marcus Thiel was charged that afternoon. I found out through a news alert on my phone as we were having lunch at a place near St. James's Park. Assault, obstruction, interfering with Her Majesty's armed forces, the exact charges I've subsequently lost track of, but there were several of them and they were not minor. My cousin read the notification over my shoulder. "Good," she said, "just that, good." I agreed, though good felt like a small word for something that had been much larger than it looked. She asked me what I thought had gone through the guardsman's mind in that moment. I thought about it. "Nothing," I finally said. "I think that's the point. They train everything out except the procedure. The procedure happens and then they go back to being still." She was quiet for a moment. "That's both impressive and a bit terrifying," she said. "Yeah," I said, "it is. There are details that cameras miss. Everyone who has ever watched a video of an event they were also present for knows this. The screen collapses the peripheral. It takes everything that existed around the thing and compresses it into a single rectangle, and the rectangle lies not deliberately, but by limitation. I've watched the video. I've watched it many times because it's circulated and people sent it to me once I mentioned I'd been there. It's 41 seconds long. It shows what it shows. But here is what it doesn't show. It doesn't show the boy. He was, I'd estimate, around 9 years old. He was part of the school group, Yellow High-Vis, small enough that he'd spent most of the morning standing on a low stone step near the memorial to see over the adults in front of him. He had one of those faces that children have when they're completely absorbed, open, slightly blank with concentration, taking everything in. He'd been watching the guardsmen long before any of this happened. I'd noticed him because my cousin had noticed him and said he was sweet, the way that children deeply absorbed in things tend to look sweet. He was standing about 15 feet from the sentry box when Thiel grabbed the rifle. I saw his face at the moment of the commotion. Not terror. Children that age don't often go straight to terror in confused moments. His face did something more complicated. His mouth opened. His eyes got wide. And then, as the guardsman performed the retention procedure and Thiel stumbled back and the voice came. "Stand back from the guard." The boy flinched, a full-body flinch, shoulders up, eyes squeezed shut for a fraction of a second. And then he opened his eyes. And he looked at the guardsman. The guardsman was back in his position, rifle correct. Eyes forward, stillness complete. The boy's expression shifted into something I genuinely have no simple word for. It was too complicated for awe. It was the look of someone watching something they haven't yet developed the vocabulary to process, and knowing, in that deep, inarticulate way that children sometimes know things, that they are watching something important. I looked away. It felt private. When I looked back a minute later, the boy had made his way to the edge of his group and was standing as close to the sentry box as any of the adults would let him get, just watching the guardsman with that absorbed, complicated expression. His teacher, a young woman with a ponytail and a sensible rain jacket, crouched down next to him and said something. He shook his head, not disagreeing, just unable to find the words. She straightened up and watched with him for a moment, and even she seemed to have run out of things to explain. The video also doesn't show the aftermath among the other guards. Buckingham Palace, when the State Guard is mounted, has multiple positions. Not just the sentry boxes at the front, but the positions at the gates within the forecourt. I'm not an expert in the specifics. I know broadly how it works, but not every detail, and I'm not going to pretend I tracked every position that morning. But I did notice, in the minutes following the incident, that there was a subtle change in the attentiveness of the other visible guards. Nothing overt. Nothing that would show on a camera at that distance. But having watched them for a while before the incident, I could tell, in the way you can tell when a room of people becomes more alert, that something had shifted. They knew. Obviously they knew. They're trained, they're in communication, and one of their own had just had someone try to snatch his weapon. Of course they knew. But watching them remain still, perform exactly the same stillness, exactly the same correctness, while clearly operating on a heightened internal register, was its own particular thing to observe. The closest one to Guardsman Foy, positioned further up the forecourt, turned his head on a standard patrol movement. Just a turn, correct, measured. But for a fraction of a second, his line of sight passed across the sentry box, and you could see barely, if you were looking, the faintest assessment in it. He completed his movement. He returned to stillness. Professional in the most complete sense of the word. What also doesn't appear on the video is the conversation that happened about 20 minutes after the police had taken Thiel away. A woman, I'd put her in her mid-60s, well-dressed, the kind of purposeful manner that suggests she's used to being somewhere specific and knowing what she's doing there, came and stood near the sentry box. She wasn't a tourist, that was clear immediately. She stood differently, held herself differently, and she didn't have a camera. She spoke to the guardsman. I couldn't hear what she said. I was 10, 12 feet away, and she spoke quietly. But I could see the guardsman's eyes, and I could see, just barely, the infinitesimal flicker of acknowledgement. The eyes didn't move, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness, just for a moment, in the way that the stillness of something alive is different from the stillness of something not alive. She spoke briefly, 2 sentences, maybe 3. Then she nodded, once composed, deliberate, and walked away. The guardsman remained exactly as he had been. I don't know who she was, I've thought about it since. She could have been a palace official, a senior member of staff, a visitor with some connection to the regiment, I don't know. But the quality of that brief exchange, dignified on both sides, quiet, containing something, has stayed with me in the same way the boy's face has stayed with me. After lunch, my cousin wanted to walk along the mall. It was that kind of afternoon, not warm, but no longer quite as threatening, and the walk from the palace toward Trafalgar Square has a quality to it that I find it hard to articulate but easy to feel. She was quieter than she'd been all morning. My cousin is not naturally a quiet person. She's from Toronto, she talks a lot, she has strong opinions about things, she fills silences. So the quiet was notable. We were about halfway along the mall when she said, "I keep thinking about his hands." "Whose?" "The guard." Thiel grabbed the rifle, and I keep thinking about what that guardsman's hands must have been doing. What training does to make your hands do something like that automatically, while your face doesn't change at all. I didn't have a good answer. "It's not just physical, is it?" she said. "It's something else, I don't know what the word is." I thought about it. "Discipline," I offered. She shook her head slightly. "That's part of it, but discipline sounds like something you impose on yourself. This seemed like something deeper, like he'd become it, not just practiced it." She was right about that. I knew she was right, even if I couldn't have said it that clearly myself. We walked in silence for a bit. "I feel bad," she said eventually. "I came here thinking it was going to be like a nice photo opportunity, something to post. I didn't think it was going to make me think about things." "That's London," I said. "It does that." She smiled a little. "Yeah." I went back the following morning, alone. I told myself it was because I wanted to check something I'd noticed about the gates, some architectural detail I'd been wondering about. This was not true. I went back because I needed to see it again, the sentry box, the position, the specific quality of presence that the guards carry in that place. It was earlier than the previous day, maybe 8:30. The tourist crowd hadn't gathered yet, and the morning felt personal, the light flat and clean. A different guardsman was on post, different face, same precision. Same stillness. I stood at a respectable distance and I looked at him for a while. He was young, possibly younger than Foy, though I couldn't be sure. The bearskin made everyone look smaller, strangely. The uniform made everyone look larger. These contradictions seemed appropriate somehow. A maintenance truck went past on the road behind me. 2 pigeons conducted an argument near the memorial. A cyclist rang their bell at someone further up the road. The guardsman didn't move. I thought about Foy. I thought about what it takes to stand in a spot while someone grabs your weapon, to execute a retention procedure so drilled it bypasses panic, to return to stillness before the last echo of your own command voice has faded. I thought about the fact that he was 23. I'm 31. At 23, I was making extremely questionable decisions about what to study and what to eat for dinner. Foy at 23 had stood in that box. There's a version of this story that makes it simple. Idiot tries to grab a guard's gun, guard deals with it, end of story. That version circulated online, and it's not wrong exactly, but it's thin. It doesn't carry the weight of the actual morning. The actual morning was about more than a physical altercation that lasted 2 seconds. It was about an institution made of people. Real, specific people. A 23-year-old from Doncaster, a boy in a yellow high-vis jacket, a woman who's composed 2 sentences clearly meant something, the other guards maintaining their stillness while their awareness sharpened. It was about the gap between the theatrical surface of the thing, the bearskins, the scarlet, the sentry boxes, and the actual substance underneath, which is not theatrical at all. The surface is ceremony. The substance is preparation and commitment, and a very particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage because it doesn't move, doesn't raise its voice, doesn't perform itself for anyone watching. It stands there. That's all. But the standing there, correctly, completely, under any circumstance, is not nothing. It is, I've come to think, quite a lot. I did not expect to speak to him. That's important to say first. I'm not the sort of person who engineers these things, who decides a story deserves a particular ending, and then goes about manufacturing it. What happened was much more ordinary than that. 6 days after the incident at the palace, I was in a cafe in Victoria, one of those independent ones tucked onto a side street, the kind that survives because the regulars are loyal and the coffee is honest. I was working. My laptop was open. I had a flat white going cold at my elbow, and I wasn't thinking about Buckingham Palace or March the 14th or any of it. A group of 3 young men came in. Off-duty military, you can sometimes tell without the uniform, something in the posture, the economy of movement. They ordered, found a table near the window, settled with the ease of people who are used to spending a lot of time in groups. I didn't pay them any real attention until about 20 minutes later when one of them, sitting with his back to me, I could only see the back of his head, said something to the other 2, and one of the others glanced over his shoulder and said, with the relaxed cruelty of close friendship, "There he is. Celebrity." The one with his back to me told him to stop, in terms I won't reproduce here but which were warmly meant. I kept not paying attention. This is London. People have private conversations in public places, and that's their business. But then the one facing me, blonde, cheerful-looking, the kind of face that's already thinking of the next thing it wants to say, saw that I was looking up from my screen with what was probably a more interested expression than I'd intended. "All right," he said, in that London way that means approximately nothing and also everything. "Yeah," I said. There was a pause. "You were there, weren't you?" he said, not a question exactly. And I looked at the man whose back was to me, and he turned around, and I recognized the jaw, the age, the general build, different without the bearskin and the scarlet. Entirely different without the uniform, just a young man in a gray hoodie and dark jeans. But yes. I said. His name was Daniel. He confirmed that after a moment when it became clear I'd already connected it. He said it without drama, which was consistent with everything else about him. His friends introduced themselves, Reese from Cardiff, and a third one, Jamie, who was quiet but present. They'd all done their training together, served together in various configurations, ended up in London at the same time. I asked if it was strange, me having been there. He thought about it. "A bit," he said. "The video thing was strange, people sending it that." "You saw it?" "Mum sent it, that was the strange bit." A short, dry laugh. "She sends me stuff sometimes, usually football scores. That wasn't what I was expecting." I asked if she'd been worried. She'd already seen the news by the time she sent the video, so she knew I was fine, but she called after. He paused. "She cried a bit, not a lot, she's not that type, but a bit." The way he said it was careful. He loved his mother. That was clear, and clearly not something he was going to make a performance of. "What did she say?" I asked. He thought about this longer than I'd expected. "She said she was proud," he said, and then she said, "Don't ever do something like that again," which, I mean, not exactly in my control. Another short laugh. I asked him what he remembered of the moment itself. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, It's not like you think, he said. People ask me that, what it felt like. A couple of the lads asked me after, and the answer is that it didn't feel like very much at the time. That sounds wrong, but it's true. Everything happens and you're not thinking. The body does the thing, the procedure. That's what the training is for. The idea is that you don't have to think. Does it always work like that? When it's good training. He said this without any particular pride, just factually. When you've done it enough that it lives in your hands rather than your head, then it works. Reese made a small sound that might have been agreement, or might have been comment on his coffee. The thinking comes after, Daniel continued. On post you're not thinking really, you're present but not processing, if that makes sense. And then when it's over, when you've been stood down and you're back inside and it's quiet, that's when your head catches up. I asked what his head said when it caught up. He was quiet for a moment. Mostly I just wanted to ring my mum, he said, which I did, a beat, and I wanted tea. Which I also had. Reese, who had been listening with the patience of someone who has heard the broad strokes of this story, but is still interested in the specific telling, leaned forward. Tell him the bit about the kid, he said. Daniel gave Reese a look, not annoyed, more like he'd been considering whether to mention it himself. The kid, I asked. Daniel looked at his coffee. There was a school group there, kids, little ones, and one of them I couldn't see properly. You're not really supposed to be tracking individual faces while you're on post, but at some point I was aware that there was a kid very close to the box, after it all settled, standing there looking at me. I thought of the boy in the yellow high-vis, the absorbed, complicated expression. I couldn't react to him, Daniel said. That's the job, you don't react, but I was aware of him. Kids, they sometimes come right up close and you can't do anything, you just hold the line. And this kid, he stood there for, it felt like a long time. I couldn't say how long. He paused, and then his teacher said something to him and he went back to the group, and I heard him say something to the teacher as he went. He looked up at me. I heard him say, I want to do that when I grow up. He said this without any ceremony, quietly the way he said most things. The cafe was not a quiet place. There was the machine noise, the ambient chatter, the door opening, but the sentence landed in its own stillness. What did that feel like? I asked. He thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. Strange, he said. Good strange, because when you're on post you're very far inside yourself, really. Whatever's going on outside is separate, but that cut through somehow. He shook his head slightly. Funny thing to cut through. I asked him about the training, not the specifics. I wasn't after technical information, but the shape of it, what it took, what it changed. He was thoughtful about this in a way that suggested he'd considered it before, not because anyone had asked him, but because it was the kind of thing you think about when you've been through it. The physical part, people think that's the hard part, he said. The drill, the standing, the parade work. And it's hard, don't get me wrong, the first time you do a long ceremonial posting, your back is not great. A small, rueful expression. But that's not the hard part. What is? Learning to be removed from the moment, he said. Sounds strange. But when you're standing and people are walking past and people are doing whatever they're doing, being loud or staring or being right in your face because they think it's funny, your job is to not be in that. Not because you're not aware. You are, but you don't live in it. You live in the task. He thought for a moment. It's like, imagine you're having the worst day. Something's happened, something personal, whatever. And you still have to come in, put on the uniform, stand your post. The palace doesn't care about your bad day. The uniform doesn't care. And eventually you learn that in some ways that's not a burden. It's a release. The uniform and the post exist in their own space, and you step into that space, and for however long you're on, the other things wait. He paused. That sounds more philosophical than I mean it. I'm not a philosophical person. No, it makes sense, I said. The lads would laugh at me, he said with a glance at Reese. Reese, who had been listening with every sign of attentiveness, said, I'm not laughing. And he wasn't. I told him about the older man in the green wax jacket, the one who'd said, simply, years and a particular kind of character. Daniel considered this. That's fair, he said, though I'd say the character comes partly from the years. You're not born with it entirely, you build it. What were you like before? I asked. He smiled for the first time, a proper one reaching his eyes. Don't ask me, ask my mum. A pause. I was normal. I was a normal kid, bit directionless after school if I'm honest. Didn't know what I wanted. A mate of mine signed up and I thought, why not? Not the most heroic origin story. Doesn't have to be heroic to be valid, I said. No, he agreed, it doesn't. I asked him before we wrapped up. They had somewhere to be, and I had a cold, flat white and an overdue deadline, if he'd had time to think about what Thiel had been thinking. What motivates someone to do that? He considered this carefully. He was, I'd realized by now, a careful thinker. He didn't fill silences for the sake of it. I don't know what was going on with him, he said. And I haven't spent a lot of time wondering, to be honest. There's a version where it's just someone having a terrible day making a terrible decision. There's a version where it's something worse than that. I genuinely don't know. He looked down at his cup. What I do know is that the point of the training, the point of the posting, is that it doesn't matter. Whatever his reasons were, I had a job. The job happened. That was the end of it from my side. He said this without coldness. It wasn't a dismissal. It was, I thought, a kind of clarity that most people spend their whole lives failing to develop. The ability to be fully present for your function without being consumed by the variables around it. The courts can worry about his reasons, Daniel said. That's what they're for. We parted ways outside the cafe. His friends walked ahead, and he paused for a moment on the pavement. Weird you being there, he said again. Yeah, I agreed. You writing about it? Maybe, probably. He nodded once. That's fine. Then after a moment, say something true if you do. I told him I'd try. He gave a small nod, the same quality of nod I'd seen, somehow, in the woman outside the palace gate 6 days before, composed and contained and meaning more than its size, and walked away. I went home and sat with it for a long time. I thought about what he'd said, about the uniform existing in its own space and stepping into it, and the other things waiting. About the boy who said he wanted to do that when he grew up. About his mother, who cried a bit and said, don't ever do it again. About the training that lives in your hands rather than your head. About the word character and how it's built rather than given. I thought about standing in a sentry box at Buckingham Palace while someone grabs your weapon, and the only thing that happens, the only visible thing, is that they don't get it. And then they're on the ground, and then you return to position. And then the cold comes back into the morning, and the tourists take their photographs, and the schoolchildren in yellow high-vis jackets press forward to see, and the day continues exactly as it was designed to continue. The palace stands, the guard stands, and somewhere in that image, the uniform in the sentry box, the bayonet fixed, the face completely still, there is something that I cannot fully articulate but that I believe very strongly is worth standing for. Say something true, he said. Here it is. There are people in this world who have chosen to be the thing that doesn't move when the world tries to make it move. Not because they're unfeeling, not because they're machines. Because they've understood, somewhere deep in the training and the years and the particular shape of who they've become, that reliability is its own form of courage. They stand there so we don't have to worry about whether they're standing there. That's the whole job. And it is, quietly and without any fuss, magnificent.